Well, it is time for us to start talking about the third line of defense, which is specific and internal. So, when we talk about the specific immune system or the third line of defense, we are talking also about it's the same thing. It's the adaptive immune response. So, the idea of the adaptive immune response is that it is three things: specific, where particular pathogens or foreign substances are recognized; systemic, in that it undergoes treatment of the entire body as a whole; and thirdly, it has memory. So it's able to recognize further attacks by that specific pathogen in the future and readily and quickly eradicate the pathogen. So again, the adaptive immune response is first specific, second systemic, and third has memory. So the general idea of the specific immune system is that we're going to be looking for pathogenic antigens. Pathogenic antigens are substances that provoke an immune response. These are usually large, complex molecules, but there will always be antigenic determinants. Antigenic determinants are the portion of an antigen which stimulates an immune response. So in this one, the antigen is the center structure here. So say this is some kind of let's just picture it as being a virus. This virus has, as you can see, a pointy structure here and a circular structure here and a little peg here. And so these are considered antigenic determinants. And you can see the shape here: pointy, roundy, peg. These then provoke an immune response. And we already see here one of the most powerful ways that we have to fight off antigenic determinants is to release antibodies that specifically fit those antigenic determinants. So you'll see that there is a complementary antibody for each of them. Antibody A fits with the pointy, antibody B fits with the roundy, and antibody C fits with the peg. Now, we've already taken a look at phagocytosis, and the idea of phagocytosis generally is thought of as like consuming a pathogen, breaking it down into parts, and then releasing it. But what you should understand is that what we're looking at here is a non-specific cell, just a cell that's consuming something non-self and munching it down and getting rid of that one bacterium. Yes? But what we're going to do, we're going to further that idea at this point and say that these cells are actually capable of communicating. So lymphocytes, antigen-presenting cells, and specific molecules can identify and destroy non-self substances. They recognize the pathogenic antigens, the pathogenic antigen determinants in the body. They will bind to the pathogen. They will often engulf the pathogen and consume it. And then they're able to communicate with one another. The whole system mounts a response specific to those particular pathogenic antigens. And then the antigen-presenting cells, now that it is presenting things, now that it is communicating, it is considered an antigen-presenting cell, not just a phagocyte. So an antigen-presenting cell presents antigens to the T lymphocytes, which initiate a response. This response in turn produces a response that is greater in inflammation and a greater level of B lymphocytes and a greater level of T lymphocytes, greater release of cytokines, and the whole thing gets going. So when we look at this, what's happening in this picture, we have to go a little bit further. One, cells are able to recognize the pathogens. Two, they're able to communicate with one another. And three, they are now antigen-presenting cells that present antigens and mount a very powerful response. So it's kind of like in that order. You only need a number one if you're looking at a very localized, like a small cut in your finger, and all you need to do is get rid of the bacteria that kind of seeped in through the wound. But you need to get to higher levels, 2 and 3, when you have something particularly nasty attacking the body, especially if it's starting to get become threatening against the system as a whole. All right, so when we talk about that more powerful response, I'm going to be doing videos for each of these, but the basic idea is that there are two types of cells that are responsible for this specific immune response. First of all, we have B lymphocytes. As you can see, B cells and T cells are both born in your bone marrow. The B lymphocytes will go directly to lymph nodes. Usually that's where they live, like in the germinal centers of the follicles of lymph nodes. T lymphocytes will become immunocompetent inside of the thymus, and that is where they actually become fully mature T lymphocytes that are immunocompetent, and then they go and live in the lymph node, and that's why they're called T cells. They're called T cells because they become immunocompetent in the thymus. B cells become immunocompetent in the bone marrow itself. Okay, so when we look at this then, the B cells are present in the lymph and in the blood. They are responsible for making sure that bacteria, toxins, and viruses are marked for later destruction. That's their main role. And this is considered antibody-mediated immunity. When you look at B lymphocytes, you must immediately think antibodies. The T lymphocyte response is called cell-mediated immunity. This is defense of the body by living cells. And then I think I'll just kind of get into the details of that in the video. The basic idea of T lymphocytes is they are able to respond to pathogens that have already entered the body's cells. So B lymphocytes produce antibodies. Antibodies are able to make their way amongst all of the body's fluids as long as the thing is not in the cell itself. Once it's in the cell, then you need T lymphocytes present to make sure that things are taken care of. So again, B lymphocytes, it's called antibody-mediated immunity. T lymphocytes, it's called cell-mediated immunity. What I will say is that they both have lots in common. They both have a few things in common. B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes will display unique receptors on their surface. They enable the cell to recognize and bind to a specific pathogenic antigen. Many antigen receptors are going to be present on each of the cells, the T cell or the B cell, and all of them on one cell are exactly the same. They are able to bind to only one pathogenic antigen. So this is where we get to the specificity here. All right, and then the last thing I want to say is that you have to understand the concept of a challenge. The antigen challenge is very important. The T lymphocytes and the B lymphocytes will not develop unless they have been challenged. So the antigen challenge is the first encounter between pathogen and lymphocyte, either B lymphocyte or T lymphocyte.